Hello, cousin Johnny here. I'd like to shout out to the sponsors of the Buzzin' with Cousin show. Max Fit Meals, 520 Fremont Street, Monterey. Grab and go healthy meals. They're delish. I Heart You Candles and Gifts, 329 Lighthouse in Monterey. Also Tuesday night at Farmers Market, Monterey. That garlic stuff, if you like garlic, you're going to love that garlic stuff. Tuesday at Monterey Farmers Market. And go to thatgarlicstuff.com for more information and more locations. Destination 831, live streaming. Promote yourself, promote your business. Destination 831. Go to Facebook, and Kevin Armstead will take care of you. The Sweet Spot on 9 Delfino Place, Carmel Valley, California. Beautiful spot. Sit out there in the sun. You got olive oil. You've got wine tasting. You got sandwiches, baked goods. The Sweet Spot. 9 Delfino Place, Carmel Valley. Thank you, the sponsors, for helping out. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Hello. Welcome to Buzzing with Cousin Johnny here. How's everybody doing today? It's a great day here in Monterey, and I'm so excited about our special guest today. This is going to be a treat for all you history buffs. I'm going to get right to it right now. He's an author. He started the Cannery Row. He started the Cannery Row Foundation, creator of the History Company, and I'm proud to welcome Michael Hemp. Michael, welcome to the show.
Happy to be with you, Johnny. It's going to be a pleasure.
Before we start, it's I've known about you, and I had your book, and I finally get a chance to meet you. So glad to meet you.
Well, it's been a pleasure so far. I'm looking forward to having a really great time with you today.
Sounds good, and I'd like to thank you and all the other historians, but for what you guys do preserving our history here in beautiful Monterey Peninsula. So thank you for what you do, and other historians, what you guys have done keeping the history alive here in Monterey. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate that. It's often a kind of under the radar sort of operation for a lot of people. And all I can tell you, anybody who's a historian or writer for that case too, it's a different solo life. A lot of it's alone. And so when you get finally a chance to share what you're working on, it's a real pleasure.
It's nice. Yeah. And I'm a Sicilian background, and my dad fished, and a lot of our relatives fished. And so my grandmother and my mom worked at the cannery for a while. Then my grandmother was there a lot for years at the Hovden Cannery, which is now the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I remember just walking in, and just no problem. They walked in. I don't think that would ever happen again. There'd be security. There'd be all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So once again, thank you. And Michael, where are you from, and how did you end up in Monterey? I mean,
born and raised in Berkeley, California.
Okay.
1942. So hold your breath, kids. That makes me pretty old. But I fell in love with Monterey the first time I drove down with my driver's license in a 56 Chevy convertible. And I saw the Monterey Bay as I came around the sand dunes, and I just fell off the end of the world. And I thought I'd be there forever. I did make my way back to take a real risky job in 1979 with Gary Ibsen, doing Adventures in Dining and eventually Monterey Life magazine.
Oh, great.
while I was in the process of that, I started the Cannery Row Foundation in 1983 and became its executive director so I could do the history of Cannery Row, which hadn't been written yet. Believe it or not, there was really no substantive history of Cannery Row done. So I had a chance to stay out there, and every day was a work day, talking with cannery workers and fishermen, skippers, cannery, the people that worked around Cannery Row, Dick O'Kane, Kalisa Moore, all the characters on Cannery Row too, and about easily over a thousand interviews in the last 40 years at this. But it gave me a chance to spend literally every day on Cannery Row and get stuff that nobody else could get, because the bad journal had passed for history on Cannery Row, and the whole story was really in the minds and lives of the cannery workers and the fishermen that had the information that nobody else was getting. So it's basically an oral history combined with the photography of principally the Pat Hathaway Foundation. My dear friend and closest colleague, Pat Hathaway, passed away in January of 21.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge loss, but he's left us a legacy. And fortunately, I've had access to it since 1986, when we did our first edition of my history. So I'm very happy to have a chance to show you your audience a little bit today of what we've got to talk about. I know it's going to take a couple of these podcasts to even scratch more than the surface, Johnny, but we better get rolling, because I've got a lot of stuff to show you.
We're happy to we're happy to have you come back and a tribute there to Pat Hathaway, a fine gentleman, and he was dedicated to the history of Monterey. So hats off to him. So Michael, I hear we're in for a treat. You're going to do like a little power presentation. So we're looking forward to that. And I want to just show everybody real quick here your book. It's in the 5th edition, Cannery Row, with hundreds of old photos, and it's really a treasure to have. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is in that book, and we're going to show you how you could get that book for your collection. It's a must-have if you're a history buff. So Michael, let's go ahead and get this thing going on the PowerPoint presentation. So here we go.
There we are, buzzing with Cousin Johnny Aliotti, which presents me, Michael Kenneth Hemp, 1983 founder, historian, and president emeritus of the Cannery Row Foundation. How about that? Also author of these 3 books that Johnny can talk about with me. First of all, the history we're going to cover somewhat today. That's the history of Cannery Row. I also authored a book called End of Lies. It's the Najik pheromone, biochemical lie detection. It's a novel about mystery and actually intrigue. If there was something better than the polygraph lie detector, who'd want that? That's the basic premise of that book, because you can figure out all the people who wouldn't want to have to be telling the truth, even if they didn't want to. And the third I've got to share with you here is an ebook. This is was written basically with Clint Eastwood in mind. It's dedicated to him. It's the part of the history I got when I was doing the history of Cannery Row that just didn't fold right in, but it's the history of Big Sur and the legend of the last otter hunter. That's an ebook. That's one of the favorite things I've done. But those are the 3 commercial things that I've got out there, and they're all available through the History Company, thehistorycompany.com or Amazon.com. If you're ask at your local bookstore if you need to find it otherwise. But I'd love to be doing business with you. And today I'm going to do Cannery Row in the Maritime Pacific Northwest. That's really the theme of what I'm going to start today. It's a new horizon of shared historical legacies with the Maritime Pacific Northwest that Monterey doesn't know very much about at all, except basically the Sicilian portion of the citizenry that has been in the fishing business, and these boats that predominantly Sicilians used to put Monterey as the sardine capital of the world. Most people, except some of the Sicilians, don't even know where those boats came from. The truth is, most of them were built where I am now, speaking to you from Gig Harbor, Washington, very near the south end of Puget Sound at Tacoma, where most of Monterey's boats were built by Croatians up here to be used by Sicilians in Monterey to do the fishing that made the John Steinbeck's Cannery Row in Monterey famous. And of course, here most of the photographs I've got are from my great friend Pat Hathaway, who passed away. His collection is now at the Monterey County Historical Society. Thank God, so people can still access his photography from there. What were you going to say, Johnny?
I was going to say that I was just paying more tribute to Pat. I'm glad that those photos are somewhere we can access them. Maybe eventually we could see them online, and because I used to order a couple photos from Pat.
Yeah, he was a giant. He was a giant in our community, and a community treasure, and has left an enormous legacy. And this is the photograph of his that he showed me about 2014 that changed my whole life, because by that time I was blowing along as the Cannery Row historian since 1986, when my book first came out. I'd been giving pretty much the same lectures that I had developed over all those years since then. And I'd seen most of the photography of the canneries and things that we needed to do the book until this came up. And it turns out to be Ed Ricketts kneeling in the bull kelp at the Point Wilson Lighthouse in Port Townsend, Washington, which is about an hour's drive from me here. And again, one of the reasons I relocated from my beloved Monterey and Carmel Valley to Gig Harbor, because this is another story just like a situation like Cannery Row. This is a story nobody has researched or written, and those are connections. Starting with this one that connects Monterey to the maritime Pacific Northwest in a number of ways that people don't know. And of course, I want Monterey to know about the Pacific Northwest, and I'm working up here to get the Pacific Northwest to know Monterey. And it all starts with the book Cannery Row, really.
That's beautiful. Yeah, great. I didn't know that. You're opening my eyes to that Pacific Northwest affiliation.
My odyssey started here when I bought this little shack on Wave Street. Some of you folks may remember this sitting out there until 1979, when I had to, I lost it. But this little cottage was a condemned artist studio. No electricity, no gas, just had water. And this is where I did most of my research on Cannery Row on Wave Street, looking over the back of the Wing Chong Market and over at the construction of the Monterey Plaza, the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the rest of it. This is one of the most important guys in my life and the history of Cannery Row. This is Charlie Nonella, who happened to work at the Hovden for 18 years with a guy by the name of Harold Otis Bicknell, whose nickname is Gabe, and he is Mac in John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. So Charlie was one of Mac and the boys, one of the survivors. He had a photographic memory after going straight. Of course, all these guys were alcoholics on the line, like the bums that John Steinbeck wrote about. He's one of them. But he kicked it and came out the other end with a photographic memory of everything he ever did on Cannery Row, and that enabled me to tell a story that no amount of newspapers could. And that was all about chasing this guy, Edward.
Doc.
Yeah, this is Doc. And by the way, there ain't no Doc Ricketts. Please, folks, there ain't no Doc Ricketts. Steinbeck never, ever put those two words together. And you can tell Ed heads and true fans and the educated about Ed Ricketts, only his friends only called him Doc. Called him Ed. He was Ed to all of his friends and most of his close associates. It's the people who have read Cannery Row by John Steinbeck who have put that name together with him. It's not a bad deal, except that Doc Ricketts clouds over the fact that he's not the Doc in Steinbeck's Cannery Row. In some ways, a drinker and a poor soul. He was a gigantic scientist in our culture that we're only finding out about after generations of marine biologists knew that. But this guy is the father of ecology, and he came out of that little shack on Cannery Row that's still there, and traveled all over the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast to complete his introduction of ecology. And this is where he lived. That little square roof that you see in the center of this photograph is the Ed Ricketts lab that is there today, and across the street is the bordello of Flora Woods.
Okay.
Is gone, of course, by now. Here's Ed, and here's Flora in the middle of the 30s. And here's the actual palace flop house that John Steinbeck put in the book Cannery Row. He named it the Palace Flop House. He put a fish meal barn in this place, which is actually up the block. He gets to change things around, but the Palace Flop House was really this building, which John describes as a fish meal barn. This happens to be Highway 1, where Carmel Valley Road turns off into Carmel Valley, where the frog hunts in John Steinbeck was done. And at that time, Carmel Valley was an orchard valley. So all these orchards out here had irrigation ponds, and they were full of frogs. So the farmers out there were glad to have guys come in and steal all the frogs they wanted. And they came out here in routine missions to provide frogs for John Steinbeck's Cannery Row, and the story of how they were used to finance a birthday for Ed Ricketts, which is actually the theme of John's book. I keep stepping on you, Johnny. I hate to.
No, I'm not. No, I'm fine.
This, of course, is the Wing Chong market in the late or early 50s. This is the book. This is the place that opens John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. He had an enormous regard for the Chinese, and particularly the owner of the Wing Chong market, Wan Yi, who he changes his name to Li Chong for the book Cannery Row. But this is a real place, and next to it, the stucco building there is the La Ida Cafe, which was the second largest bordello on Cannery Row and became the restaurant site for the Queen of Cannery Row, Kalisa Moore, in 1957. And of course, this is the inside of it. Looks just like every Chinese store you've probably ever been in if you've lived as long as we have. And here's a look at the window where the boys would pick out their old tennis shoes, the cheapest whiskey they could buy, guaranteed aged at least 2 weeks.
Wow, 87 cents.
Yep. And again, then along came this photo, and that changed my direction completely. And this will give you an idea. This is just a really rough early map of the lower part of the maritime Pacific Northwest, meaning the ocean side and the Puget Sound area. The red dots that you folks can see there are the earliest locations where Ed Ricketts spent his time in the early 30s, 1,000 miles and more from Cannery Row. Wow. These dots range from Wallachet Bay near Gig Harbor, where I am, to the far side of Vancouver Island. And nobody ever knew, really, except the scientists that read his book that came out in 1939, Between Pacific Tides. The marine biologists were the only ones that had any idea that he traveled this far to do his work. And this is one of the cars he traveled in. This is his second Packard. It was a 30 Packard that he bought in 1933, and he and his family would ride in this car up into the Pacific Northwest in this black Packard from his lab. This is what the original lab looked like on Cannery Row when it was converted from a bungalow there, and it was raised and a basement was put under it. This burned in 1936 and left this in its place. And of course, this is the lab on Cannery Row that everybody knows as Doc's lab.
Okay.
But it's the center of the earth for anybody involved in marine biology or John Steinbeck, and those fans of Ed Ricketts we call Ed heads. And this happens to be the first photograph of Cannery Row, probably in the 1870s. The wagon rut that you see going up the left-hand side of this photograph is going to become Ocean View Avenue, which has a nickname called Cannery Row as it heads out toward the Chinese settlement at China Point in the distance. The Chinese were very big in the area here, and out at Stillwater Cove, the Chinese were there doing all kinds of fishing. They had the place to themselves until the golf course came along, and this is the home of Jung San Choi, the Chinese family that lived there, and their site is now the site of the Beach and Tennis Club.
Wow, yeah, great.
Lodge at Pebble Beach. Isn't that something? Contrast. And of course, the Chinese had another big role, even out of Point Lobos, because the what they call the Portuguese whaling station or whaler's cabin was actually built by the Chinese. And the Japanese showed up in the cove in the late hours of the 1800s, 1896, 1897, and began harvesting abalone with hard hat diving, and brought that technology to Cannery Row eventually. Made a huge impact. I'll keep this one in here to give folks a look at the actual flora of the actual nature of Point Lobos without the trees that have grown up today. You can see how naked it is. This is the natural state of it if you don't cultivate it the way we have to preserve it. And all that was done there in the cove was about this thing, which Monterey and anybody but the Orientals wouldn't even touch with a 10-foot pole. But abalone was a delicacy for everybody else in the Oriental and Asian interests. Turn of the century. This is a postcard in 1900 showing a fraction of about 130 of these small sailboats.
Wow.
Mostly Japanese owned, that were fishing for salmon on hook and line, and on a day like this would catch 7,000 salmon on a hook and line basis in one day. And that started the salmon industry in Monterey, and that's the first connection we have to the Pacific Northwest, because they, of course, are the epicenter for the salmon world. But we also had a big salmon industry here, but it was seasonal, but there were sardines everywhere all year round. So the business shifted to sardines, and the salmon kind of waned in comparison. And Frank Booth put his cannery right in the harbor and got the canning business started, although the Chinese still had, and this is Maccabee Beach in the center of Cannery Row in 1911. And they're still drying fish on the racks outside the buildings there. They also, one of the Chinese families from San Francisco built this in 1937. This is the old Ocean View Hotel that a lot of folks may recall. It's now the Spindrift Inn, if you don't recognize it in its reincarnation. Johnny, jump in on me wherever you can here, wherever you'd like to.
I was just saying that Spindrift there was, to the listeners, when you're on Cannery Row, that's the Spindrift Hotel. You've got Lala Ocean View Grill down below the restaurant. So that's the hotel that Michael's talking about. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, this is the what's just under the skin of commercial Cannery Row today, and this is all in the book. So you get to see the then and nows if you just walk down the street. But this is the first real cannery that developed from a Japanese startup in 1902, the same year John Steinbeck was born. But this became Calpac, California Packing. It's a Del Monte company. And this is how the fish were cut. The ladies in these crews would use flensing knives to cut the heads and tails and take the guts out of these fish and spread them on these flakes, they would call them, the racks, to drain the oil off of them. The men would put them in these metal baskets and drag them through troughs of boiling peanut oil to cook the fish. And then the hands were can soldered closed. The cans were hand soldered. Ooh.
Wow.
In any case, that was the way things were done. It's called the European method, and it was used in Europe, and it was current in Monterey up to just before the First World War. Newt Hovden came to town in 1905 and changed the whole business because he had so much experience in the Norwegian sardine industry, and he put a cannery like this right at the end of Cannery Row. And wouldn't you know, you already described it, Johnny, this is the site of now the Monterey Bay Aquarium.
Beautiful, yeah.
Most of the canneries were not quite as fancy. These things were horrors that had as little investment as possible to make as much possible money. And they were built so they on this rocky coast south of the harbor. So you had to put cables out hundreds of yards offshore to be able to offload the boats. And here's one of the Monterey clippers out there, and it's lighter. It's barge that is filled during the night of fishing, being emptied a 600-pound steel bucket at a time after a night's fishing when you're emptying a 30-ton lighter. And all this was done under the aegis of the Sicilians that came to Monterey in the early 1900s and led by Pietro Ferrante and his less but very important associate, Orazio Ania. I think Pietro just had a better advertising agency on his side, but both these guys were really important. And it was the
Look at that. Yeah.
Monterey Clipper that dominated the Monterey fishing industry and got it a real rolling head start. You can see there's one of the finest open water boats ever built. But it was really tough because they were fishing at night in a boat like this on the open ocean in Monterey. And it was rough and dangerous work, but the Sicilians had the perfect work ethic and the skill and the experience from nets used in the Mediterranean, like the Lampara and the Persane, which became important later. And it was to break a fisherman's strike in 1926 that Hovden sent to his tuna operation down in Southern California and brought the first Persaner into Monterey Bay. And this beauty was about 50 feet long, as we talked about, Johnny.
The Admiral.
Yeah, nice big cabin. It had a big diesel engine. It could take you to the Farallons if you wanted to chase fish that far. It had a galley. It had a winch that did all the pulling, so there was no more pulling nets in by hand, which is how it was done till then. And a tackle and boom setup that could stack the net on a revolving turntable at the end of the boat and make it immediately reusable to make the next set immediately. And in a hold, it could carry 50, 60 tons of fish. So these were the new wolves of the sea. And the secret now, folks, is that almost all of them were built where I am now in the South Puget Sound area in and around Tacoma. There is a city waterway on Tacoma waterfront where Martin Olich, Martinak, Western Boat, Beresich, Barberi Brothers. There was a handful of the best boat builders in the world producing these kind of boats specifically for fishing in the waters of Monterey. So there was immediately from this time on, there was a very close collaboration between Sicilian fishermen here and a whole industry of Croatian boat builders up in this area that nobody has really known about. This is a cultural share that we ought to be celebrating more. And in 1937, the Croatians at the Western Boat Building Company of Martin Petric built the Western Flyer. And on this day in 1937, this was the cutting edge of fishing technology. This was, and this is exactly the way she looks like today. She has just been put back in the water at the end of this last month and is now in Seattle at Snow and Company, getting its hybrid engine installed and all the electronic controls and all. But it became part of the Monterey fleet in 1938. It's anchored out there with all these other boats that the visitors would wonder, why are these boats sitting here? I thought they were a fishing business here. Well, visitors and a lot of uninformed people didn't know that this fleet is out at night to catch the sardines.
Yes.
It was, again, still dangerous work in the dark, but it's the way it had to be done. And boats like this, as Steinbeck said, waddled into Monterey Bay full of sardines to discharge them into hoppers, like you see here. It's a slant-sided wooden pen with connected to the bottom of the bay and put together underwater by sections of pipes. There it is.
Hopper.
And it was the divers that had to assemble these pipes underwater in really dangerous work. And so the Cannery Row Foundation, we put a very popular site now. There's this memorial to the divers of Cannery Row,
yes,
along the beach site.
That's a beautiful monument down there.
It sure is.
Down towards the Coast Guard Pier. If anybody's down there grabbing some lunch and a little picnic, make sure you check out that monument. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I'll speed now through the canning process because the pumps with the pumps, there were pumps in the canneries that would suck the fish ashore, as you see here, and the fish would go to the top of the canneries, and they first went to the cutting machines like this that replaced the ladies with their knives. And so this is what cutting machines looked like in the 1930s and 40s, and the most high-paid cannery worker ever in the history of Cannery Row or in the history of the world happened to be none other than Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, yeah.
As a fish cutter in an RKO movie of 1952 called Clash by Night. And this is one you got to see on Netflix or wherever you can, because it starred Barbara Stanwyck, Paul Douglas, Robert Ryan, Marilyn Monroe.
I'm writing it down right now.
Yeah, and it was filmed on Fisherman's Wharf. Pardon me.
Wow.
Anthony's was used as was one of the major sites out there for you old timers. Anthony's was set for a lot of the shots in this movie. At the same time going on, of course, this shows the CalPac line with the ladies packing those big Monterey sardines into 1 pound ovals. And all those cans were then automatically sealed and put in baskets and rolled into pressure cookers, especially the ladies recognize these lug locks immediately as like your mother's and your grandmother's pressure cooker on the stove. But these were pressure cooked by the chef for temperature and time to cook the sardines in their cans. The dirtiest secret about Monterey in the fishing era is that 2/3 of Monterey sardines never saw a can at all. They were put in these huge rotating gas-fired kilns that basically turned them into fish meal and fertilizer, which was far more profitable than to a canner than 100 people in the canning lines and teams of laborers and mechanics and workmen in the canneries. In fact, this production was done completely. They didn't have to pack any number of sardines. The shoreline canneries had to pack at least 11 cases per ton of sardines in order to stay legal. Well, offshore there was a fleet of them turning just wholly edible sardines into fish meal and fertilizer. And I think that was the backbreaker that broke the back of the Monterey fishing industry ultimately. Here's Hank Damewood, one of the workers at that time. I never thought he'd be famous. He's on the cover of my book for years now, as he walks under the 16 crossovers from the warehouse side of the street on the left of this photo to the canning side of the street on the ocean side on the other. And the empty cans and supplies would go across the street on these overheads on conveyor belt, and canned fish came back across along with pipes of sardine oil. And this is what Cannery Row looked like. Nothing glamorous about it, but right in the middle of this photograph is the Del Mar Cannery, which is now the Monterey Intercontinental Hotel.
Intercontinental, yeah.
And
you know what? Excuse me, Michael. You know what's great that the architecture of the Cannery Row, they have the overpasses still there, and it gives it's like they're giving the history. They're showing the history
There are only two that are original anymore, but the city wisely made anybody doing a big construction like these hotels required that they put crossovers to keep the cannery character intact.
Yeah, that's the words. Yeah, character.
This
Good.
photograph is what we call the Steinbeck neighborhood. It's at that same area. This is the Del Mar Cannery, which is now the Intercontinental. And to the right of this photograph is the Monterey Bay Aquarium. But in this photograph, most of the book Cannery Row was written in this photograph. And in 1930, John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts met. Ricketts on the left, John Steinbeck on the right. They're middle-aged guys, one a scientist and one a writer, and they were the highest. They became the highest symbiosis of science and literature in the American experience, bar none. And this is where they met. I can actually show you where these guys met, not in a dentist's office like John wrote about in Cannery Row, but this is what the Calvin Cottage looks like today. You can still find it on Upper 12th Street. I'll give you that tip. I'm not going to tell you the address, but folks around Cannery Row or Carmel can go find it.
Wow, nice.
John would work all day writing, no messing around. And Ed, here he is in 1938 with his mom and his son. And this is his 1937 Ford V8 Coupe. Crappy little car, he called it, but it was a lot cheaper to run than the Packard. Yeah. And then, of course, he was struck by the Del Monte Express when his car stalled on the tracks on the grade there on May 8th, 1948, and he died 3 days later of his injuries. And nobody expected anything like that to happen. Here's a guy who could feel the tide change, and yet he gets hit by a train. He waited too long to try to get out of the car, and he got crushed between the driver's door and the door post. You can see from the rider's side, if he had just jumped to the rider's side, he probably would have survived, but that's not what was in his plan. And in 1997, the Cannery Row Foundation put up this really popular memorial to Ed Ricketts at the crash site near the Monterey Plaza Hotel.
Yes, that's popular.
This I keep this in here just to show you. In the middle, some of you may be able to read this, but I'll do it for you. In the Monterey column of the seasonal landings in 1941-42, it was 250,000 tons in that season, that 6-month season. 10 years later, in 1951, it was 15,000 tons.
Oh, wow.
So this was a disaster. And people, the scientists like Ed Ricketts and a number of others in Monterey knew it was coming. The industry just ignored them the way industry often does, and they paid the price. And unfortunately, Monterey had no plan B for what happens if we lose the sardine industry. So this is what became of Cannery Row after the sardines went away. And these buildings were totally unusable for any other uses, and often started being, suddenly they go up in smoke, most in arson cases. The street died, or very nearly died, until Wesley Dodge came along. And Wes Dodge and his partner, George Leitzinger, and a couple others, he had he was a genius and had this epiphany, and went around buying up all these old canneries for nearly nothing and selling the equipment that he stripped out of these canneries overseas for more than he paid for the property. Wow. How's that for a business plan, huh? Yeah. And it goes back as far as into the 50s, where Kalisa was part of that revival of Cannery Row, where the people started coming back. Neil Devons was the pioneer that put the first restaurant on the street. Kalisa was among the next in 57. And it went on and on. And of course, Ted Balestre and Bert Catino opened the sardine factory, and off Cannery Row went on its revival, its renaissance.
And then the movie Play Misty for Me.
Yeah,
that shot in the arm.
Famous for it, yeah. And Kalisa spent 50 years on Cannery Row. We call her the Queen of Cannery Row. She kept John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts and history alive on that street. single-handedly. In 1939, these are the two books that put both Steinbeck and Ricketts on the map. The Between Pacific Tides was Ed's anthem to ecology, and Grapes of Wrath was written the same year, and John had a different reaction. He had threats on his life, so they decided they were going to get out of Dodge, and they took a trip on a Monterey purse seiner called the Western Flyer.
Yes.
From Monterey to Baja and up into the Gulf of California, called the Sea of Cortez, to get Steinbeck out of their gun sites and to conduct a genuine scientific operation that made this boat world famous. And it's coming back to home port Monterey here very soon from where it's been up here. Here's the corner at Cabo San Lucas is the same today as it looked like when they headed up into the Gulf. And two books came out of it. The Sea of Cortez was the story of the trip and the science behind it. It was published just before Pearl Harbor, so it didn't do much until John Steinbeck took the narrative part of the book, and now it's called The Log of the Sea of Cortez, the story of the Sea of Cortez, and should be on every Monterey reader's list. This is absolutely essential. And here's my gratitude to Bob and Nia. Stepped out of the crowd in 1983 and said, "Hey, Mike, how'd you like to get your hands on the Western Flyer?"
Wow.
And I thought it was an impossibility. And I did everything I can to support him in his work to locate it. He had a pretty good idea of where it was. And he's the guy most responsible for the existence of the Western Flyer, because if he hadn't found it, it probably could have gone the way of most of those old boats, like some that are still left in the Monterey Harbor. But most of these old boats were splittered. Bobby knew where it was and actually found it. And he also happened to be the nephew of both the skipper and one of the world's most famous deckhands, Sparky and Nia.
Yes,
and
yes.
They were both his uncles. So this is the guy you've got to get on your show. That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
He knows he's the fishing historian expert in Monterey, and I can't say enough about the guy and what a debt we owe this guy for locating and preserving the Western Flyer. Here she is returning from the Sea of Cortez. And now the real saga begins when the Western Flyer disappears from Monterey in 1948 after the sardines are gone, and it disappears into the Pacific Northwest, and nobody knows where the hell it is.
Yeah.
Well, in 1961 to 63, actually, it was part of the International Halibut Commission study to determine how much damage the Russian and Japanese ship trawlers were doing to the flounder and halibut business on the West Coast. And 10 years later, it finally ended up that the Western Flyer had helped establish the Magnuson Act, which is the 200-mile fishing limit now. The boat here is in 1977 when it was renamed the Gemini in 1970. It was sold in 1977, and here it is at Homer in Alaska, converted to immediately to crabbing from trawling. And here that boat is in 1980. No, pardon me. This is actually 2013. This would be 2013. No, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I've got that wrong. I'm ahead of myself. The boat, this is sitting in a place called the Swinomish Channel. It's near Anacortes, Washington. Anacortes. And because it was named the Gemini, nobody could have ever found it as the Western Flyer. Of course, nobody was looking for the Western Flyer except Bob anyway, but here it was in Washington State, and here's where he found it and was making deals for it. We got beat out of it by a gentleman, call him a gentleman, from Salinas that stole the boat from a foundation that Bobby had formed to buy it, and he wasn't going to do anything with it that we wanted. Bobby and I wanted to turn it into a nonprofit charter operation operating from the harbor of Monterey, but
Right.
this guy had other plans. And while he had it, it sank once in 2012, right at that mooring, and again in 2013. And then the Coast Guard said, "Get this thing up and out of here, or we're going to bulldoze it."
Yeah.
And so here's what happened to it. They patched it up after a lot of trouble and expense, and it was towed down to Port Townsend, that place where Nick Ricketts was kneeling in the bull kelp in 1930.
Oh, yeah.
Same place. There's things come around. And here's the way she looked from 2013 to 2015, sitting outside at Port Townsend, just homeless, until it was bought by John Gregg, a marine geologist who paid $1 million for this boat that didn't float. He said it was worthless, but it was priceless. And it's his dedication to restoring this boat has been monumental. And there cannot be enough said about his fortitude and his persistence to save this boat and restore it as a classic symbol of Monterey. Everybody needs this book, by the way. It's out of print, so try to find it wherever you can. But Kevin Bailey is a Monterey native, educated at University of Washington in the fisheries. This is a history of the Western Flyer and its role in the near extinction of 5 major fisheries in the Pacific Northwest, in addition to its role in the Sea of Cortez. And in 2015, here at Hopkins University, Hopkins Marine Station at Stanford, I produced a Cannery Row Foundation symposium that I didn't announce, but I was able to get John Gregg to come secretly to this symposium to make the world's first announcement about the salvation of the Western Flyer. Beautiful. And I'm just so proud to say that everything you have ever heard about the Western Flyer since then started at this symposium, and it was a great one. It had some really great talent in the fishing and boating and Ricketts and Steinbeck world. Here's John Gregg and Bobby making the presentation. He's introducing John Gregg to make the presentation of Gregg and his brother saving the Western Flyer that Bobby is holding a picture of on its maiden voyage. This is the crew at the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op that started the work on the Western Flyer in 2015. I was fortunate enough to be the startup historian and historical consultant to John Gregg and the Western Flyer project for 2015 and 2016 to get the project started. Wow, these folks are the finest people in the world that could possibly have worked on that wooden boat. So here she is going into the shed. You can see what kind of shape she's in.
Yeah.
Horrible. Here's the way she looks now. This is actually a picture of her on her sea trials in Tacoma in 1937, but the boat looks like that today.
We can't wait. We can't wait to see her come back.
Yeah, the restored vision isn't going to be a booze cruise or anything like that. It's going to be a floating classroom with a hybrid diesel propulsion and a bunch of other technical features. But its real mission, its heartbeat, is to inspire youth into the marine sciences. And again, this boat, world famous boat that's going to be home ported in Monterey, is joined at the hip to the birthplace of the Western Flyer in Tacoma, Washington. I think we all ought to be working on connecting those two. And here I am at the restoration of the Western Flyer in July of this year, when she came out of the shed looking just like she did when she was brand new in 1937. She was taken out to the wheeled out on to the ramp and lowered into the water. And the next day she was towed over to Seattle to the Snow and Company for the installation of her hybrid engine and the rest of her equipment.
Unbelievable, beautiful.
This was one of the early graphics of what it was going to look like, and the boat actually does really look like that today, including its rover. It has an underwater ROV rover shaped like a nautilus. It's amazing. We could do another whole we'll have to do another whole podcast on just this.
Yeah, that's for sure.
The other important item here is this will give you an idea of what the hold of the ship looks like now. This is where the sardines used to be put after capture. This is going to be this is a rendition of what the scientific classroom is going to look like to do the scientific studies in the hold of the Western Flyer as she travels from Monterey to Sitka, Alaska in northern directions, and as far south as the Sea of Cortez. It's going to be an amazing sight. Amazing. And out of one special note I'd like to make to the listeners, when the Western Flyer was sold in 1976 in Homer, Alaska, the folks that bought it, the Fry family, stripped the old chain steering out of the boat. And did I lose the picture there, Private Johnny?
Yeah.
Okay. When they stripped out all the original parts, the steering, the brass steering wheel on the fly bridge, the shifter that did the articulated brass shifter, forward, neutral, and reverse, yeah. the compasses, all of that has been saved by the family. One of the sons saved it for some unknown reason, and that I call them the crown jewels of the Western Flyer are still there and available. These folks are working folks. They can't give it to a museum. I represent them, and we're looking for a donor who's got $75,000 to buy this stuff and then donate it to either the Foss Waterway Seaport in Tacoma, where she was across the waterway from the birthplace of the Western Flyer, or to some organization, hopefully the city of Monterey would be the other possibility that could acquire this. And the donor would then donate the cost of this to the city for a tax deduction, and their name would be put on it like a football stadium. Their name would be on this collection of the Western Flyer in perpetuity.
That's historical, Michael. Really historical.
We're lucky to have that possibility, and it all brings us back to where this started. The Pacific Biological Laboratories of Ed Ricketts. And except for questions that folks might want to send in to you, Johnny, we'll be happy to get back to them. I do want to mention, thank you for giving me the opportunity to mention.
Michael, this has been a fascinating time with you, and just you always pick up something new, and about the Pacific Northwest, the association between Monterey and Pacific Northwest that is out of this world. Yeah. Thank you.
I was having a great and fulfilling time as the Cannery Row historian for being on the street for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
But I just can't tell you how fulfilling it is to be part of a new thing that connects Monterey to something more important than we ever thought was going to come up. This story has been out there all this time, and I was just fortunate enough to be the guy with the experience in Monterey Cannery Row history to be able to go up north here and start putting this whole story together. I think there ought to be a much more complete connection between specifically the South Sound of Washington State and the city and peninsula of Monterey. That's it.
Okay, Michael, this has been unbelievable. It's been great. And I got to ask you a question. And the question is, are you willing to come back for another show?
Oh, listen, I want to apologize for how fast I had to speed through this, Johnny. There are probably 6 podcasts we ought to do about the detail that we have just covered. Okay. But the big story is in this book, along with a special section at the back that explains what's happening and how many ways we're connected that we never knew about before that are in progress in my research up here. The book is $34.95. That's the COVID price. It's expensive, but it's the biggest one yet. And it's shipping is free. I'll sign them and dedicate them. You can get them from the History Company this way, and it includes a free authentic sardine label as a bookmark.
Collector's item.
Or you can get it from Amazon or some other bookstore, but they're unable to provide the additional signing and labels. So that's what I have on offer. And I want to thank you, Johnny, for the chance to get our feet wet in this topic. And I'm looking forward to speaking very often with you about
I'm
getting
really
to the.
looking forward to.
There are so many people and so many stories I want Monterey to know about that I could not put in this history book, and I couldn't reach any other way than through something like your buzzing cousin, buzzing with cousin. I want to be buzzing with you, Johnny.
Thanks for buzzing with me. Now, anybody out there that just post questions, give me a call, send me an email, send me a message if you have any questions for Michael, and we'll make sure that you get your questions answered. Michael, this has been a fascinating time with you. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate what you do, preserving our beautiful history here in Monterey. So I'm going to let you go, and I'd like to thank you so much.
I want to thank you, Johnny, for the opportunity, and look forward to a lot more of this and reaching your audience in ways I could not do on my own. I really, I'm indebted to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you.
Michael, thank you. Okay, what a fascinating time that was with Michael Hemp. I mean, the relationship between the Pacific Northwest and Monterey, and just Cannery Row, of all the people that made it Cannery Row. The Japanese, the Sicilians, the Chinese, the Portuguese. I mean, they are all instrumental in Cannery Row. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in for this beautiful event today. And we're going to do it again. We're going to get Michael Hemp back again for some more history. And so anyway, I'd like to everybody have a great day and enjoy this great weather of Monterey. And we will see you. We will see you down the road. Bye.